Good evening and welcome back. Tonight, we're diving into one of the most controversial and captivating theories ever to capture the human imagination. A theory that asks us to reconsider everything we think we know about ancient history. A theory that suggests our ancestors weren't working alone when they built the pyramids, carved the Nazca Lines, or raised the mysterious statues of Easter Island. As always, let me know where in the world you're listening from. Get cozy, settle in, and let's begin. Picture this. According to von Däniken's own telling, in 1954, when he was a young man of 19, he stood at the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. At that time, visitors could still climb the ancient structure, something no longer permitted today. As the story goes, his palms were sweating, his heart racing. This wasn't just tourist excitement. This was something deeper. Something that would, in his view, change the course of his life and spark a worldwide conversation that continues to this day. Erich Anton Paul von Däniken was born on April 14th, 1935, in Zofingen, Switzerland, though he grew up in Schaffhausen. From the very beginning, he was different. Raised in a strict Catholic household, young Erich was sent to a Jesuit boarding school, the Collège Saint-Michel in Fribourg, where he was expected to absorb the teachings of the Church without question. But Erich was a freethinker, a rebel, someone who couldn't accept what he was told simply because authority demanded it. At that grammar school, he studied and translated ancient texts in Latin and Greek, poring over religious manuscripts that were meant to inspire devotion. Instead, they inspired doubt. As he read these ancient stories, something didn't sit right with him. The descriptions of beings descending from the sky in vehicles of fire, the accounts of gods with incredible powers, the tales of divine intervention that defied natural law. Erich began to wonder, what if these weren't metaphors at all? What if the ancients were describing something real? Something they simply didn't have the language to properly explain? What if what they called gods were actually visitors from another world? This wasn't an idea he could share with his Jesuit teachers, so he kept it to himself, letting it grow quietly in his mind, nourished by every ancient text he encountered. After leaving school, von Däniken entered the hospitality industry, eventually becoming a hotel manager in Davos, one of Switzerland's premier mountain resort towns. It seemed like an ordinary career path for a young Swiss man. By day, he managed guests, oversaw staff, handled accounts. But by night, and during every spare moment, he read, researched, and traveled. The questions never stopped multiplying. During these years in the 1950s and early 60s, he traveled extensively whenever he could, visiting archaeological sites across the globe: Egypt, Peru, Mexico, Lebanon, Greece, Cambodia. Every destination fed his growing conviction. Everywhere he went, he saw the same thing: magnificent structures, incredible achievements, sophisticated engineering. And according to conventional history, they were all built by people with primitive tools and limited technology. How was that possible? He wasn't satisfied with the answers he found in guidebooks or from tour guides. They'd explain that the ancient Egyptians used copper tools to cut limestone, that the Maya developed sophisticated mathematics and astronomy without telescopes, that the Inca moved massive stones by organizing large labor forces. But to von Däniken, these explanations felt inadequate. The scale, the precision, the similarities between distant cultures, all of it suggested something more, something the experts weren't seeing or weren't willing to admit. The more he saw, the less the standard explanations satisfied him. How did the ancient Egyptians move blocks weighing dozens of tons with nothing but copper tools and wooden sledges? How did they achieve such precision in measuring and cutting? How did the builders of Pumapunku in Bolivia create stone blocks with such exact edges that they fit together with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, thousands of years before modern machinery? How did ancient peoples on opposite sides of the world build pyramids that looked so similar if they never had contact with each other? How did cultures without written records apparently share sophisticated astronomical knowledge? The questions multiplied faster than the answers. He started writing articles about his theories in 1961, but publishers weren't interested. The ideas were too radical, too far outside the mainstream. 20 publishers rejected his manuscript before one finally took a chance on it. In 1968, his book, Erinnerungen an der Zukunft, was published in Germany, which translates to Memories of the Future. The English translation, released shortly after, carried a title that would become iconic. Chariots of the Gods. The timing couldn't have been better. This was 1968, the same year Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 A Space Odyssey hit theaters, painting vivid pictures of advanced alien civilizations guiding human evolution. The space race was in full swing. Humanity had its eyes on the stars, wondering what might be out there. And now, here was von Däniken, suggesting that we'd already met them thousands of years ago, and they'd left their mark all over our planet. The book exploded, not gradually, but like a supernova. It sold 7 million copies in its first few years alone. It was translated into dozens of languages. Suddenly, Erich von Däniken, the hotel manager who'd been rejected by 20 publishers, was an international sensation. People couldn't stop talking about his theories. Dinner party conversations turned to ancient aliens. Students debated his ideas in classrooms. The book became more than just a bestseller. It became a cultural phenomenon. But von Däniken's path wasn't without its troubles. In the late 1960s, he faced legal issues in Switzerland related to financial improprieties from his hotel management days. He was convicted of fraud and embezzlement and served time in prison. His critics would later point to this as evidence of a broader pattern of deception. How could you trust a man convicted of fraud about his extraordinary claims? Von Däniken, however, saw his prison time differently. He used those quiet hours behind bars to write, to refine his theories, to work on his next books. When he emerged, he was more determined than ever to prove his case. Over the following decades, von Däniken would write more than 40 books, all exploring variations of his central thesis. Titles like Gods from Outer Space, The Gold of the Gods, In Search of Ancient Gods. Each one dove deeper into the evidence he believed supported his theory. Each one sold millions of copies. By the time of his death on January 10th, 2026, just weeks ago at the age of 90, von Däniken had sold an estimated 70 million books worldwide. His ideas had inspired television series, documentaries, theme parks, and countless imitators. Love him or hate him, agree with him or think he's completely wrong, one thing was undeniable. Erich von Däniken had changed the conversation about ancient history. But what exactly was he claiming? What was this theory that captivated so many minds and infuriated so many scientists? To understand the phenomenon of von Däniken, we need to understand the core of his argument, the foundation upon which he built an empire of alternative history. At its heart, von Däniken's theory was both simple and revolutionary. He proposed that thousands of years ago, perhaps tens of thousands of years ago, extraterrestrial beings visited Earth. These weren't just casual flybys, quick observations from orbit. No, these aliens landed. They walked among our ancestors. They taught them, they helped them, and possibly they even altered our very biology through genetic manipulation, accelerating human evolution in ways that natural selection alone could not explain. According to von Däniken, Our ancient ancestors encountered these beings and, having no frame of reference for advanced technology, interpreted them as gods. The spaceships became chariots of fire. The astronauts became angels or divine messengers. The technology became miracles. Every religion, every mythology, every ancient text describing supernatural beings and impossible events, von Däniken argued, was actually a garbled record of extraterrestrial contact. This wasn't just speculation for the sake of a good story. Von Däniken claimed he had evidence, lots of it. Physical evidence in the form of ancient structures that seemed impossible to build with primitive technology. Artistic evidence in the form of carvings and paintings that appeared to show spacemen and flying craft. Textual evidence in the form of religious and mythological writings that described beings from the sky with incredible powers. And archaeological evidence in the form of artifacts that seemed out of place for their time, too advanced, too precise, too sophisticated. Let's take the ancient Sumerian texts, for example. Von Däniken pointed to the Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki, beings who came from the heavens. According to Sumerian mythology, these Anunnaki came to Earth to mine gold and eventually created humans to serve as workers. To most historians and mythologists, this is classic creation mythology, explaining human existence through stories of divine intervention. But von Däniken asked, what if this wasn't mythology at all? What if the Anunnaki were a real alien race who needed gold for some technological purpose, perhaps to repair their planet's atmosphere? What if they genetically engineered Homo sapiens by combining their own DNA with that of primitive hominids, creating a hybrid species capable of labor and intelligence? What if the sudden appearance of modern humans, the relatively rapid development of civilization, could be explained by this genetic manipulation? This kind of reinterpretation was von Däniken's signature move. Take an ancient story, strip away the mythological language, assume that the ancients were describing real events they didn't understand, and underneath, he claimed, you'd find a historical record of alien contact. He applied this method consistently across cultures and continents. The biblical story of Ezekiel's vision. The prophet described wheels within wheels, creatures with 4 faces, fire and lightning, objects that moved without turning, powered by something Ezekiel called the Spirit. Von Däniken looked at this elaborate description and saw a spacecraft. The wheels were landing gear or propulsion systems. The creatures were the alien beings, or perhaps robotic systems. The fire was engine exhaust. Ezekiel was doing his best to describe advanced technology using the limited vocabulary of his time. The Indian Vedic texts describing Vimanas, flying palaces of the gods. Von Däniken pored over these ancient Sanskrit texts, noting what he saw as detailed descriptions of these flying machines, their construction, their propulsion, even battle tactics for aerial combat. To scholars of Indian literature and religion, these were mythological vehicles, fantastical elements of epic poetry, no more literally real than Pegasus or the flying carpet of Arabian Nights. The text described many impossible things, from gods with multiple arms to mountains that could fly. But to von Däniken, these descriptions seemed too specific to be purely imaginative. He pointed to what he considered details about metallic construction, multiple levels, capacity for long-distance travel. Based on his interpretation, the ancients must have seen real flying craft and recorded what they witnessed, even if mainstream scholars view these as poetic elaborations within a mythological framework. The Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime stories of sky beings who came down in the time before time. Von Däniken collected accounts of ancestral spirits descending from the stars, teaching the first peoples about fire, tools, and survival. To anthropologists, these were origin stories, explaining how human society began, locating its source in a mythic past beyond ordinary time. But to von Däniken, they were accounts of first contact, of extraterrestrial visitors establishing human civilization and then departing, leaving behind only legends and cargo, cult-like worship of the beings from the sky. His central argument rested on a foundation that seemed logical on the surface. Ancient humans, he claimed, simply didn't have the knowledge or technology to accomplish what they did. Therefore, they must have had help. This reasoning appeared in every one of his books, applied to every mysterious ancient achievement. The precision of the pyramids? Alien assistance. The massive stones of Baalbek? Alien technology. The Nazca Lines visible only from the air. Messages to alien visitors, or perhaps landing strips for their craft. Von Däniken was particularly drawn to what he called ooparts, or out-of-place artifacts. These were objects that seemed too advanced for their supposed age. A 2,000-year-old battery found in Iraq. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek device that appeared to be a complex astronomical calculator. Ancient maps that seemed to show coastlines with impossible accuracy. Each of these, to von Däniken, was a piece of the puzzle. Evidence that our ancestors had access to knowledge far beyond what mainstream archaeology was willing to admit. But there was another layer to his theory, one that made it even more appealing to many people. Von Däniken suggested that these alien visitors had promised to return, that they were still watching us, that humanity's development was part of some larger cosmic plan. In his later books and interviews, he spoke with certainty about this coming return, saying he knew definitively that the visitors would come back. This gave his theory an almost religious quality, a sense of prophetic revelation that went beyond mere historical speculation. The beauty of von Däniken's approach, at least from a marketing perspective, was its universality. He drew from cultures all over the world: Egyptian, Mayan, Indian, Chinese, African, European. No matter where you were from, von Däniken had probably written about the ancient aliens who visited your ancestors. This global scope made the theory feel comprehensive, well-researched, impossible to dismiss as focusing on just one civilization or one corner of the world. He also had a gift for presentation. His books were filled with photographs, many of them taken by von Däniken himself during his travels. He'd stand next to massive stones or point at ancient carvings, and the captions would ask provocative questions. How did they do this? What were they trying to show? Could this be evidence of advanced technology? He never claimed to have all the answers, which made him seem humble, seeking truth rather than pushing dogma. But the questions were always leading, always pointing toward the same conclusion. Aliens were here. The response to these ideas was divided from the start. On one side, millions of readers found von Däniken's theories fascinating, even liberating. Here was someone who looked at the mysteries of the past and offered explanations that were grand, cosmic, thrilling. Someone who suggested that humans weren't alone in the universe, that we'd never been alone, that we were part of something much larger. For people who felt frustrated with conventional history, who thought mainstream archaeology was too rigid, too dismissive of alternative explanations, von Däniken was a hero, a truth-teller fighting against the establishment. On the other side, scientists, archaeologists, and historians were horrified. They saw von Däniken's work not as groundbreaking research, but as dangerous pseudoscience. His methods, they argued, were fundamentally flawed. He cherry-picked evidence that supported his conclusions while ignoring everything that contradicted them. He misrepresented what archaeologists actually knew and understood about ancient civilizations. He underestimated the ingenuity and capability of ancient peoples, essentially claiming they were too primitive to achieve what they clearly achieved. And perhaps most troubling, he presented speculation as fact, wrapping unfounded theories in the language of discovery and revelation. The academic response was swift. In 1972, archaeologist Clifford Wilson published Crash Go the Chariots, a point-by-point refutation of von Däniken's claims. In 1976, Ronald Story published The Space Gods Revealed, another detailed debunking. Universities held lectures explaining why von Däniken's interpretations didn't hold up to scrutiny. Science journals published articles critiquing his methodology. But here's the thing. None of it mattered, not really. Because for every academic paper published against him, von Däniken sold another 1 million books. The divide wasn't just about evidence or methodology, it was about worldview, about what people wanted to believe, about how we tell stories about our past. And as we'll see, some of the most famous pieces of evidence von Däniken presented, the examples that became iconic in popular culture, tell us as much about human psychology and our relationship with history as they do about ancient civilizations. Let's start with perhaps the most famous example, the Pyramids of Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as one of the most magnificent structures ever created by human hands. Built around 2,500 years before the Common Era, it was the tallest human-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. It consists of an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons. The precision of its construction is remarkable. The base is level to within just over 2 centimeters. The sides align almost perfectly with the 4 cardinal directions. The stones fit together so tightly that you can't slip a knife blade between them in many places. When von Däniken looked at the Great Pyramid, he saw impossibility. How, he asked, could ancient Egyptians with copper tools, wooden sledges and rope have accomplished this? How did they cut the stones so precisely? How did they move blocks weighing dozens of tons? How did they place them with such accuracy? The conventional explanations, he argued, simply didn't add up. Therefore, the Egyptians must have had help. Alien help. In Chariots of the Gods, von Däniken wrote that Egypt became a fantastic, ready-made civilization, suddenly and without transitions. He claimed there was no developmental process, no gradual improvement in building techniques. One day, according to his version of events, the Egyptians were primitive people living in simple structures, and the next day, they were building massive pyramids with impossible precision. This, he suggested, could only be explained by extraterrestrial intervention. The aliens came, they shared their knowledge and technology, and the pyramids were the result. Von Däniken wasn't the first to suggest that the pyramids had mysterious origins. In the late 19th century, some writers had already proposed that pyramids might be connected to lost advanced civilizations, or even visitors from other worlds. But von Däniken took these fringe ideas and brought them to a massive mainstream audience. After Chariots of the Gods, millions of people around the world began to question whether humans really built the pyramids. The theory had several components. First, the engineering challenge. Von Däniken pointed out that even with modern equipment, constructing something like the Great Pyramid would be a massive undertaking. Second, the astronomical alignments. The pyramids aligned with stars in Orion's belt, he noted, suggesting advanced astronomical knowledge. Third, the sudden appearance of pyramid building. And fourth, the sheer perfection of the construction, which seemed beyond the capabilities of a civilization that hadn't even invented the wheel yet, at least not for practical use. But here's what von Däniken didn't tell his readers, or perhaps didn't know. Archaeological evidence shows that Egyptian civilization didn't appear suddenly at all. Researchers have traced a long, gradual development of culture and technology along the Nile, stretching back thousands of years before the pyramids. The pyramids themselves show what appears to be a clear evolutionary process in construction techniques. The earliest royal tombs were simple, rectangular structures called mastabas. Then came the step pyramid of Djoser, which scholars interpret as essentially mastabas stacked on top of each other. Then the bent pyramid at Dashur, where the builders clearly encountered structural problems and had to change the angle midway through construction. Based on this evidence, by the time they built the Great Pyramid at Giza, the Egyptians had been perfecting their techniques for generations. As for the construction methods, archaeologists have found extensive evidence of how the pyramids were built. Quarries where the stones were cut, with copper tools still embedded in the rock. Ramps that were used to move the blocks, their remains still visible at several sites. Villages where the workers lived, complete with bakeries that produced enough bread to feed thousands of people. Administrative documents detailing the work crews, their organization, and their supplies. Even the names of some work gangs have survived, carved into stones. The Drunkards of Menkor was one memorable team name. These weren't slaves laboring under the whip, as old Hollywood movies would have us believe. Based on archaeological evidence from worker villages and burial sites, researchers believe these were paid laborers, skilled craftsmen, and ordinary Egyptians who may have been fulfilling a form of civic duty or corvée labor. Evidence suggests they received wages in the form of food and beer. They had medical care, as skeletal remains show healed injuries consistent with construction work. When they died, they were buried in workers' cemeteries near the pyramids, with some honor, their graves identified by their occupation. The evidence points to people who took pride in their work, who likely saw building the pharaoh's eternal resting place as a sacred duty, and who developed expertise passed down from father to son. The organizational capacity required was staggering. Feeding thousands of workers required a sophisticated supply chain. Cattle and sheep were raised and slaughtered. Bread was baked in massive quantities. Beer was brewed continuously. All of this required coordination, record-keeping, and management. The papyrus documents that have survived show a bureaucracy that tracked every loaf of bread, every jar of beer, every piece of copper. This wasn't primitive chaos. This was sophisticated civilization at work. In 2017, archaeologists working at a quarry at Hatnub made a discovery that shed new light on the construction techniques. They found the remains of a ramp system with stairs on either side and post holes, suggesting the use of ropes and sledges. This system would have allowed the ancient Egyptians to move heavy blocks up steep inclines much more efficiently than previously understood. The ramp had a steep gradient, about 20%. But the post holes and grooves suggested a pulley-like system where workers could use mechanical advantage to move stones that would otherwise be impossible to lift. This discovery illustrated something crucial about ancient engineering. The Egyptians didn't have our technology, but they understood physics. They understood leverage, friction, mechanical advantage. They experimented, adapted, improved. Each pyramid taught them lessons that made the next one better. The bent pyramid at Dahshur, where the angle changes halfway up, shows a construction problem being solved in real time. They realized the original angle was too steep, risking structural failure, so they adjusted. That's not mysterious. That's engineering. The technology wasn't alien. It was human ingenuity applied over generations, refined through experience, powered by organized labor and cultural motivation. The pyramids are impressive not because they're impossible to explain, but because they represent the full flowering of a civilization that had been developing for centuries. They're testaments to what humans can accomplish when they combine knowledge, organization, and determination. The precision of the pyramids, while impressive, also isn't as perfect as von Däniken claimed. Yes, they're aligned with the cardinal directions quite well, but not perfectly. The base isn't exactly level. The blocks, while tightly fitted in many places, are actually quite rough in others, especially inside where aesthetic appearance didn't matter. The Egyptians were master builders, but they were human builders, and their work shows it. Von Däniken also pointed to other megalithic structures around the world as evidence of alien intervention. Stonehenge in England, with its massive sarsen stones, some weighing 25 tons, transported from quarries over 20 miles away. The Moai statues of Easter Island, those iconic stone heads, some weighing over 80 tons. The walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, with stones so precisely fitted that not even a piece of paper can slide between them. The massive stones of Baalbek in Lebanon, including the stone of the pregnant woman, which weighs over 1,000 tons and is one of the largest worked stones in the world. For each of these, von Däniken's argument was the same. Ancient people couldn't have done this. It's too difficult, too precise, too massive. But the reality is that archaeologists and historians have found extensive evidence suggesting how each of these structures was likely built, and in some cases have successfully demonstrated these methods. For Easter Island, researchers have shown through experiments how the Moai could be walked from the quarry to their final locations using ropes and coordinated rocking motions, methods that match wear patterns on the statues themselves. For Stonehenge, experiments have demonstrated how the stones could have been moved using wooden sledges, rollers, and large work crews, techniques well within the capabilities of Neolithic peoples. For Baalbek, the massive stones in question were never actually moved or lifted. They remain in their quarry today, never incorporated into any structure, which researchers interpret as evidence of an abandoned project when builders realized the stones were impractically large to move with available methods. The racist undertones of von Däniken's theory began to become apparent when you looked at which civilizations he targeted. The pyramids of Egypt, built by Africans. The sophisticated cities of the Maya, built by indigenous Americans. The massive Moai of Easter Island, built by Polynesians. Stonehenge was one of the few European sites regularly mentioned, and it was often framed differently, as less impressive or less mysterious than the others. Archaeologist Sarah Parcak has been blunt about this issue, saying, "The belief that aliens built the pyramids, or in fact any ancient monument, is deeply racist." The implicit message in von Däniken's work was that ancient peoples, particularly non-white peoples, couldn't have achieved these feats on their own. They needed help from a superior intelligence. This message resonated with and reinforced existing prejudices, even though von Däniken himself may not have consciously intended it. But intent doesn't erase impact. The ancient astronaut theory, at its core, diminishes the achievements of ancient civilizations by attributing their greatest accomplishments to extraterrestrial intervention rather than human ingenuity, skill, and determination. Despite all the evidence against his pyramid theories, von Däniken never backed down. Even when confronted with archaeological findings that contradicted his claims, he would simply incorporate them into his narrative or dismiss them as part of a cover-up. This flexibility made his theories almost impossible to disprove in the minds of his supporters. If new evidence emerged that supported conventional explanations, well, that was just what the establishment wanted you to believe. The real truth, he insisted, was being hidden or ignored. But the pyramids weren't the only ancient mystery that von Däniken seized upon. There was another site in the deserts of Peru that would become even more iconic in ancient astronaut circles. A place where massive drawings covered the landscape, visible only from the air as if they were meant for eyes in the sky. In the arid coastal plains of southern Peru, about 250 miles south of Lima, lies one of archaeology's most intriguing puzzles. Stretching across nearly 200 square miles of desert are hundreds of geoglyphs, massive drawings etched into the earth by removing the rust-colored pebbles to reveal the lighter ground beneath. They depict animals, a spider, a monkey, a condor with a wingspan stretching over 400 feet, geometric shapes, spirals, zigzags, straight lines that run for miles without deviating, as straight as if drawn with a ruler across the landscape. These are the Nazca Lines, created by the Nazca culture between 200 BC and 700 AD. And they're visible only from the air. From ground level, you'd walk across one without even realizing it. But from a plain or hillside, they emerge in their full, mysterious glory. The question that has puzzled researchers for decades is simple and profound. Why? Why would an ancient people create massive artworks that they themselves could never fully appreciate? What was the purpose? When von Däniken visited Nazca and saw the lines from the air, his conclusion was immediate and dramatic. In Chariots of the Gods, he wrote, "Seen from the air, the clear-cut impression that the 37-mile-long plain of Nazca made on me was that of an airfield. An airfield. Landing strips for ancient alien spacecraft. The straight lines were runways. The animal figures and geometric shapes were markers, signals, messages to the visitors from the stars." His reasoning went something like this. The ancient Nazca people, he suggested, had witnessed alien spacecraft landing in their desert. These ships made such an impression that after the aliens left, the Nazca spent generations creating their own version of the landing strips, hoping to entice the gods to return. They couldn't replicate the technology of flight, but they could create massive ground markings as a form of cargo cult, an invitation written across the desert floor. The theory was compelling for several reasons. First, the sheer scale of the lines suggested they were meant to be seen from above. Second, some of the straight lines were so perfectly straight, running for miles across varying terrain without deviation, that they seemed to require some kind of advanced surveying technique. Third, the geometric patterns and animal figures demonstrated a sophistication in design and execution that seemed at odds with a primitive culture. And fourth, there was no obvious practical purpose for the lines. They weren't roads, they weren't irrigation channels, they were purely symbolic, and their symbolism seemed directed toward the sky. Von Däniken's Nazca theory became one of his most famous claims. The idea of ancient landing strips in the Peruvian desert captured imaginations worldwide. It appeared in his books, in documentaries, in television shows. The Nazca Lines became synonymous with ancient astronaut theory. Even people who'd never read Chariots of the Gods knew about the supposed alien connection to these mysterious desert drawings. But there was a problem. Actually, several problems. And unlike the pyramids, where the construction methods were ancient history and had to be pieced together from archaeological evidence, the Nazca Lines could be tested directly. Researchers wanted to know if these lines could be created by ancient people without alien technology or aerial guidance. So they decided to find out. In the early 2000s, investigator Joe Nickell, known for his work examining paranormal claims, took up the challenge. Using only materials and methods available to the ancient Nazca people, wooden stakes and rope, He and a small team set out to recreate one of the large figures. They chose the condor, one of the most complex designs. Following the same techniques that would have been available 2,000 years ago, they carefully laid out the design using a coordinate system based on wooden stakes and measured rope lengths. The result? They successfully recreated a large, accurate geoglyph in a matter of days. The magazine Scientific American described their recreation as remarkable in its exactness compared to the original lines. This experiment demonstrated something crucial. The Nazca Lines didn't require alien technology or aerial assistance. They required planning, organization, and simple tools. The ancient Nazca people were perfectly capable of creating these massive artworks using techniques well within their technological capability. The straightness of the lines wasn't mysterious. With stakes, rope, and careful measurement, you can create perfectly straight lines of any length. The designs, no matter how large, could be scaled up from smaller drawings using a grid system. But if they weren't landing strips, what were they? Archaeologists and anthropologists who have studied the Nazca culture extensively have developed several theories based on the broader context of Nazca life and religion. One of the most widely discussed explanations, proposed by researchers including Johann Reinhard, suggests the lines were ceremonial pathways, possibly part of religious rituals related to water. The Nazca region is extremely arid, receiving only about 20 minutes of rain per year. Water was life. Water was precious. Water was sacred. This interpretation suggests the lines were offerings to mountain gods, deities believed to control the water supply. The animal figures, according to this view, represented creatures associated with water and fertility in Andean cosmology. The spider could have been connected to rain, appearing when moisture came to the desert. The monkey might have represented the jungle to the east, where water was abundant and rivers had their source. The condor flew high in the mountains where rain clouds formed. Walking these lines, perhaps in procession during religious ceremonies or as pilgrimage during times of drought, could have been a way of praying for water, of connecting with the divine forces that controlled survival. The Nazca people understood their environment intimately. They built sophisticated underground aqueducts called puquillos to tap into groundwater. They developed agricultural techniques suited to an extremely arid climate. Their survival depended on understanding water, on managing the little they had, on pleading with the gods for more. The lines make perfect sense in this context. They're not messages to aliens. They're prayers to mountain gods, written across the landscape in the only way visible to deities dwelling in distant peaks. Other researchers noted that many of the lines converge at sites where water once flowed, or where ancient Nazca communities were located. Professor Anthony Aveni studied the astronomical alignments of the lines and found that while some do align with celestial events, most don't show consistent astronomical orientations. Instead, they seem to radiate from central points, like spokes on a wheel, connecting communities and water sources. The lines might have served as sacred walkways connecting communities, temples, and the precious sources of water that sustained life in the desert. Michael Coe suggested that the lines represented ceremonial paths that the Nazca people would walk as part of ritual processions. The straight lines could be routes for religious celebrations, the animal figures markers, or representations of deities encountered along the way. Walking the lines would have been a form of worship, a physical journey mirroring a spiritual one, a way of literally walking in the footsteps of the gods. What's particularly fascinating is that the Nazca weren't alone in creating large ground drawings. Similar geoglyphs exist throughout South America and in other parts of the world. The Atacama Desert in Chile has numerous geoglyphs. So does the American Southwest. Creating large ground art was a widespread practice, not a unique mystery requiring alien explanation. Different cultures developed their own reasons and methods for making these massive markings, but they all had one thing in common. They were human creations with human purposes. Von Däniken himself later admitted that the lines could have been created without alien assistance. In 1970, he acknowledged that the Nazca markings could have been laid out on their gigantic scale by working from a model using a system of coordinates. But he didn't let go of his alien theory entirely. He simply modified it. Perhaps the ancient Nazca weren't creating landing strips. Perhaps they were creating messages to gods who they had once seen flying through the sky. The conclusion stayed the same, even if the specifics shifted. This flexibility was characteristic of von Däniken's approach. When one piece of evidence was debunked, he'd pivot, adjust, find a new interpretation that still pointed to ancient astronauts. His theories were unfalsifiable in the practical sense. Any evidence could be reinterpreted to fit the narrative. Any critique could be dismissed as narrow-minded skepticism. Any archaeological discovery that seemed to contradict his claims could be explained away. The Nazca Lines remain mysterious in their specific ceremonial meaning, which is how archaeology often works. We can understand the general purpose and cultural context of ancient practices without knowing every detail. But the mystery doesn't require aliens. It requires patience, research, and respect for the sophistication of ancient cultures. Yet the image of alien landing strips persisted in popular culture, in large part because von Däniken's interpretation was so vivid, so cinematic, so easy to visualize. You could picture it. Ancient spacecraft descending into the desert, awed humans watching from below, the desire to bring the gods back. It was a compelling story, even if it wasn't true. And the Nazca Lines weren't the only example where von Däniken took religious or mythological imagery and reinterpreted it through the lens of alien visitation. In fact, some of his most controversial claims involved ancient religious texts and artwork, where he suggested that what looked like gods and myths were actually historical records of extraterrestrial encounters. If you've ever looked at medieval paintings of religious scenes, you might have noticed something curious in the backgrounds. Strange objects in the sky, disc-shaped forms, beams of light descending from the heavens. To most art historians, these are symbolic representations of divine presence, using the visual language of the time to depict heavenly glory. But to ancient astronaut theorists, they look suspiciously like UFOs. Like spacecraft, like evidence that our ancestors were recording something real, something otherworldly, something that visited them from beyond the stars. Von Däniken seized on these images with enthusiasm. He filled his books with examples from religious art around the world. Byzantine icons showing divine beings descending in geometric craft. Sanskrit texts describing flying palaces called vimanas, with detailed accounts of their construction and operation. Aboriginal rock art in Australia showing figures with large round heads and strange clothing that, to von Däniken's eye, looked like space helmets. Sumerian cylinder seals depicting beings with wings and peculiar objects in their hands that might be ancient technology. But perhaps his most famous example, the one that became iconic in ancient astronaut circles, was the sarcophagus lid of King Pakal in Palenque, Mexico. The tomb was discovered in 1952 by Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruz Luillier, who spent 4 years excavating a hidden stairway beneath the Temple of Inscriptions. When he finally reached the burial chamber, he found an elaborately carved limestone slab covering the sarcophagus. The carving showed a human figure surrounded by intricate Mayan symbolism. When von Däniken saw photographs of this carved lid, particularly when viewed sideways, he saw something that took his breath away. An astronaut. A man sitting in what appeared to be a cockpit, his hands on controls, his foot on a pedal, flames shooting out behind him, symbols that looked like instrument panels surrounding him. To von Däniken, this wasn't Mayan mythology. This was a documentary record. King Pakal was depicted as an ancient astronaut, a pilot of an advanced spacecraft, perhaps one of the extraterrestrial visitors himself. In Chariots of the Gods, von Däniken wrote about the image with certainty and excitement. You see his upper hand, he is manipulating some controls. From the lower hand, he is turning something on. The heel of his left foot is on a kind of pedal, and outside the capsule you see a licking flame. This is incredible. This is absolute proof of extraterrestrials. Absolute proof. That was his claim. Here was a 1,500-year-old carving showing space travel, created by people who supposedly had no concept of technology, let alone space exploration. The image became famous. It appeared in countless books, television shows, documentaries. The Palenque astronaut became shorthand for the ancient astronaut theory. Even the UFO Museum in Roswell, New Mexico, created a full-scale replica of the sarcophagus lid for display. Von Däniken's interpretation entered popular consciousness so thoroughly that when tourists visited Palenque, street vendors would hold up replicas of the carving sideways and point out the alien astronaut, just in case visitors wanted that version. There was only one problem. Once scholars learned to read Mayan hieroglyphics and understand Mayan cosmology, they could actually interpret the symbolism on the sarcophagus lid. And it had nothing to do with space travel. Nothing at all. The carving depicted something far more profound to the Mayan people. It showed King Pakal at the moment of his death, falling down the world tree into Xibalba, the Mayan underworld. Let me describe what the carving actually shows, according to Mayan experts who can read the glyphs and understand the cultural context. At the center is a cruciform shape that scholars interpret as the world tree, which in Mayan cosmology connected the three realms: the upper world of the gods, the middle world of living humans, and the underworld of the dead. Based on comparisons with other Mayan artwork and the deciphered glyphs, Pakal appears to be depicted falling backward down this tree at the moment of death, his body positioned in what experts recognize as the traditional pose of a dying person, hands in the delicate positions typical of Mayan art, showing transition between worlds. Above him, at the top of the tree, sits the bird of heaven, also called the principal bird deity, representing the realm of the gods. This bird appears in countless examples of Mayan art, always in the same position, always with the same symbolic meaning. Below him is the entrance to Xibalba, depicted as the jaws of the earth monster. In Mayan belief, the underworld was literally beneath the earth, accessed through caves and crevices. The earth monster's open mouth was the gateway between worlds, a terrifying passage all souls had to navigate. The supposed flames that von Däniken interpreted as rocket exhaust are actually the earth monster's fangs and beard, stylistic elements that appear in countless examples of Mayan art. If you look at other Mayan carvings showing the earth monster, you'll see the same serpentine features, the same decorative elements. They're not trying to depict fire or exhaust. They're representing a mythological creature according to well-established artistic conventions. The control panels surrounding Pakal are jade, symbols, and glyphs. Jade was the most precious material in Mayan culture, more valuable than gold. It represented life, fertility, and power. Covering the sarcophagus lid with jade symbols wasn't about depicting technology. It was about showing Pakal's status, his wealth, his importance. The glyphs tell stories about his lineage, connecting him to the gods and to previous rulers of Palenque, establishing his legitimacy and his place in the cosmic order. The breathing apparatus is a nose ornament, a common feature in Mayan royal portraiture. Elite Maya wore elaborate jewelry, including nose ornaments, ear spools, and lip plugs. These weren't functional devices. They were status symbols, markers of wealth and power. The foot pedal is simply how Mayan artists depicted feet in profile, a stylistic convention that appears throughout their art. There's nothing about the position that suggests a control mechanism. It's just how feet looked in Mayan artistic perspective. The entire scene is framed by a double-headed serpent, another common element in Mayan art representing transition between worlds. In Mayan belief, serpents were liminal creatures associated with death and rebirth, with the passage from one state to another. The double-headed serpent specifically represented the ability to move between realms, making it the perfect frame for a scene depicting a king's journey from life to death to rebirth. What makes the carving truly remarkable isn't alien technology. It's the sophistication of Mayan religious thought. The symbolism identifies Pakal with the maize god, one of the most important deities in Mayan religion. In Mayan agricultural mythology, maize dies and is buried in the earth, only to sprout again, providing life for the people. Pakal's death is being presented in the same way. He's not just a dead king. He's a seed being planted, a promise of rebirth, a continuation of the divine cycle that sustains the world. This belief in cyclical death and rebirth wasn't unique to the Maya. Similar concepts appear in agricultural societies worldwide because they're based on observed reality. Seeds do get planted and grow. Plants do die and return. The cycle is visible, tangible, understandable. The Maya took this natural observation and built sophisticated religious and philosophical frameworks around it. That's not primitive thinking. That's abstract reasoning, symbolic thought, and complex theology. It's exactly what we'd expect from an advanced civilization. Von Däniken's interpretation ignored all of this context. He took a complex piece of religious art, removed it from its cultural setting, rotated it 90 degrees, and imposed his own modern interpretation. It's like looking at an image of Jesus being crucified and claiming it depicts an alien being orcharded by primitive humans because you don't understand Christian symbolism. The lack of cultural knowledge isn't a mystery to be solved. It's a failing of interpretation. Other experts pointed out the same pattern in von Däniken's other examples. The biblical account of Ezekiel's vision of a fiery wheel, which von Däniken claimed was clearly a spacecraft, was actually a prophetic vision full of symbolic meaning, consistent with ancient Hebrew apocalyptic literature. The Vimanas described in Sanskrit texts were mythological flying palaces of the gods, not technical manuals for ancient aircraft. The astronaut figures in Aboriginal rock art were ancestral beings from the dreamtime, spiritual entities that existed before the world took its current form. When confronted with these cultural explanations, von Däniken and his supporters had a ready response. The mainstream archaeologists were locked into their narrow interpretations, refusing to see the obvious truth right in front of them. They were prisoners of their own orthodoxy, unwilling to consider alternative explanations no matter how much evidence was presented. This framing allowed von Däniken to position himself as the brave truth seeker, while casting legitimate experts as close-minded skeptics. But there's a profound difference between being open-minded and being gullible. Being willing to consider evidence isn't the same as ignoring what we already know. When we have Mayan texts explaining their beliefs, when we have hundreds of examples of Mayan art showing the same symbolic elements, when we have a clear cultural and religious context for understanding a carving, dismissing all of that in favor of an interpretation that fits your preconceived conclusion isn't open-mindedness. It's wishful thinking at best and deliberate misrepresentation at worst. The impact of this kind of interpretation is real. It teaches people to distrust experts, to dismiss scholarship, to believe that knowing less about a subject makes your interpretation more valid than someone who's spent decades studying it. And it does something even more insidious. It teaches people that ancient cultures are fundamentally unknowable, that their art and writing and monuments are mysterious puzzles that can't be solved through careful research and cultural understanding. When in reality, the more we learn about ancient peoples, the more we can understand them, not as mysterious others, but as complex human societies with their own sophisticated ways of thinking about the world. Von Däniken's reinterpretation of ancient texts and art wasn't just about aliens. It was about stripping ancient peoples of their own voices, their own meanings, their own stories, and replacing them with a modern science fiction narrative. And nowhere was this more apparent than in one of his most famous claims, involving an ancient map that supposedly showed impossible knowledge. In 1929, a German theologian named Gustav Deissmann was cataloguing items in the library of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul when he discovered something remarkable. It was a fragment of a map drawn on gazelle skin parchment, dated to the Muslim year 919, which corresponds to 1513 AD in our calendar. The map showed the Atlantic Ocean, the western coasts of Europe and Africa, and the eastern coasts of the Americas. What made it particularly interesting was that it appeared to show parts of the New World based on information from Christopher Columbus's voyages, making it one of the earliest cartographic records of European contact with the Americas. The map was created by Piri Reis, whose full name was Haji Ahmed Muhyiddin Piri, an Ottoman admiral and skilled cartographer. In notes on the map itself, Piri Reis explained that he had compiled it using 20 different source maps, including what he described as 8 Ptolemaic maps from ancient Greek geography, 4 Portuguese maps, 1 Arabic map, and crucially, 1 map he claimed was drawn by Christopher Columbus himself, though no Columbus maps are known to have survived. It was a scholarly work for its time, a synthesis of the best geographical knowledge available in the early 16th century. The Piri Reis map remained a curiosity, primarily of interest to historians of cartography, until 1966, when Professor Charles Hapgood published a book called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. Hapgood, who taught at the University of New Hampshire, had studied the map with his students and come to startling conclusions. He claimed that the southern portion of the map didn't show the coast of South America at all. Instead, he said it showed Antarctica. Not just Antarctica, but Antarctica without its ice cap, as it might have appeared thousands of years before it was covered in ice. And since no one in 1513 knew that Antarctica even existed, much less what its coastline looked like beneath the ice, this could only mean one thing. Piri Reis must have based his map on much older source material, maps created by an ancient civilization with advanced seafaring and surveying capabilities. Hapgood's theory was built on several assumptions. First, that the southern coastline on the map matched Antarctica's true coastline beneath the ice with remarkable precision. Second, that this precision couldn't be achieved without advanced surveying techniques. Third, that the map used sophisticated projection techniques that shouldn't have been available in 1513. And fourth, that there must have been an ancient advanced civilization capable of global exploration and map-making that has since been lost to history. Hapgood went further. He claimed that the level of accuracy in depicting this ice-free Antarctica suggested that the original map must have been created using aerial surveying, possibly from a satellite position. The only way to achieve such precision, he argued, would be to map from high altitude, something impossible for any known ancient culture. Therefore, the map must have been created by a lost advanced civilization, or possibly by extraterrestrial visitors who mapped Earth from space and shared this knowledge with ancient humans. This wasn't just about one map. Hapgood believed he'd found evidence of a global civilization that existed before the last ice age. A civilization that had been wiped out by cataclysm, but had left traces of its advanced knowledge in maps passed down through generations. When Erich von Däniken read Hapgood's work, he immediately incorporated it into his own theories. Here was exactly the kind of evidence he'd been looking for, an ancient map showing impossible knowledge. In Chariots of the Gods, von Däniken wrote about the Piri Reis map with excitement, claiming it showed Antarctic mountains that were still buried under ice and could only be mapped with modern equipment. He suggested this was clear evidence of ancient astronauts who had mapped Earth from space and left their knowledge for humanity to discover. The theory spread. Graham Hancock picked it up in his best-selling book, Fingerprints of the Gods, using it as evidence for his own theories about lost civilizations. Other ancient astronaut enthusiasts cited it regularly. The Piri Reis map became one of the go-to pieces of evidence for alternative history theories. Here was a real, physical artifact that seemed to show knowledge that shouldn't exist. You couldn't dismiss it as misinterpreted mythology or subjective interpretation. It was a map, drawn on parchment, authenticated as genuinely from 1513, and it seemed to show Antarctica. But there was a problem. Several problems, actually. Let's start with the most basic one. The portion of the Piri Reis map that Hapgood and von Däniken claimed showed Antarctica doesn't extend far enough south to reach Antarctica. If you overlay the map accurately on a globe, it only goes as far south as the coast of Argentina, ending roughly at the latitude of Uruguay. It simply doesn't reach the Antarctic continent at all. So what was Piri Reis actually depicting? Almost certainly, he was showing the coast of South America, but with significant distortions and errors, which were common in early maps of the New World. Cartographers in the early 16th century were working with fragmentary information from explorers who had sailed along coastlines but hadn't fully charted them. They were trying to piece together a coherent picture from incomplete reports, and their maps reflected that uncertainty. The Antarctic coast was just a distorted version of Patagonia. The idea that the map showed Antarctica also required ignoring some obvious problems. If that southern landmass was really Antarctica, it would mean that Antarctica and South America were connected at Uruguay, with no Drake Passage between them. It would also mean that Argentina didn't exist at the time the supposed ancient source maps were created. These geographical impossibilities didn't seem to trouble alternative historians, but they were fatal flaws in the theory. As for the accuracy of the map, when you actually compare the Piri Reis map to modern maps without manipulating or distorting either one, the accuracy is mixed at best. Some coastlines are reasonably well represented, which makes sense given that Piri Reis was working from early Portuguese maps of areas that had been explored. Other areas show significant errors and distortions, which also makes sense given the state of geographical knowledge in 1513. The map is impressive for its time, showing the synthesizing work of a skilled cartographer. But it's not mysteriously accurate. It's accurately limited by the knowledge available when it was created. Hapgood's claim about aerial surveying was based on his belief that the map used Mercator projection, a technique for representing the spherical Earth on a flat surface that wasn't developed by Europeans until later in the 16th century. If the map really used this projection, it might suggest access to more advanced geographical knowledge. But cartographic experts who examined the Piri Reis map found that it didn't actually use Mercator projection. It used simpler techniques that were well known to Mediterranean cartographers of the time, adapted from ancient Greek geographical work by Ptolemy. The ice-free Antarctica theory also conflicts with what scientists understand about Earth's climate history. Ice core data and geological evidence indicate that Antarctica has been covered in ice for millions of years. Current scientific understanding suggests the last time it was substantially ice-free was over 15 million years ago, long before humans existed, let alone developed map-making skills. Any theory requiring maps from an ice-free Antarctica would need to explain this enormous chronological gap. Finally, there's the fact that Piri Reis himself told us exactly what sources he used, and none of them were mysterious ancient maps from lost civilizations. He cited Columbus, Portuguese explorers, and ancient Greek cartographic work. There's no mention of secret knowledge or ancient advanced civilizations. He was simply doing what cartographers do, compiling the best available information into a comprehensive map. Despite all of this evidence, the Piri Reis map continues to be cited as proof of ancient astronauts or lost civilizations. Why? Because the story is compelling. The idea of a map showing impossible knowledge, of ancient secrets waiting to be rediscovered, of evidence that mainstream science can't explain. All of this appeals to something deep in human psychology. We want there to be mysteries. We want our ancestors to have been more than conventional history admits. We want the world to be stranger and more wondrous than the textbooks tell us. But wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. And the Piri Reis map, when examined carefully and honestly, doesn't show what von Däniken and other alternative historians claimed it showed. It's a remarkable artifact of early 16th century cartography, impressive in its own right without needing to invent impossible origins. The real story of how it was created, how Piri Reis synthesized multiple sources into a comprehensive map, using the techniques available to him, is actually more interesting than the fantasy of ancient astronauts mapping Earth from space. Yet the willingness to believe in such fantasies, to embrace theories that contradict evidence and logic, reveals something important about the appeal of von Däniken's work. It wasn't really about the evidence. It never was. It was about the story, the narrative, the way it made people feel to imagine that history was grander and stranger than the official version. And that appeal would only grow stronger in the decades following the publication of Chariots of the Gods. By the mid-1970s, Erich von Däniken had become an international phenomenon. His books were bestsellers in dozens of languages. Millions of people around the world believed, or at least entertained the possibility, that ancient astronauts had visited Earth. Polls showed that a significant percentage of the population thought his theories deserved serious consideration. He'd given lectures at universities, appeared on television programs, and been interviewed by major newspapers and magazines. The ancient astronaut theory had achieved mainstream recognition. But while von Däniken's popularity soared with the public, his reputation in the scientific and academic communities was in freefall. Archaeologists, historians, and scientists watched with growing alarm as his theories spread, convinced that he was doing real damage to public understanding of history and science. They saw his work not as alternative research or revolutionary thinking, but as dangerous pseudoscience that misled people about how we know what we know about the past. The academic response was comprehensive and unsparing. In 1972, archaeologist Clifford Wilson published Crash Go the Chariots, a detailed critique of von Däniken's claims. The title was a play on Chariots of the Gods, and the content was a systematic takedown of von Däniken's methodology, evidence, and conclusions. Wilson went through von Däniken's examples point by point, explaining how each one was based on misrepresentation, misunderstanding, or outright fabrication. In 1976, Ronald Story published The Space Gods Revealed, another comprehensive rebuttal. Story's book was reviewed as a coherent and much-needed refutation of von Däniken's theories. It examined not just the evidence, but the logical structure of von Däniken's arguments, showing how they relied on circular reasoning and unfalsifiable claims. If evidence supported the theory, von Däniken claimed vindication. If evidence contradicted the theory, he claimed conspiracy or narrow-mindedness. Either way, the theory survived. Academic journals published papers explaining why ancient structures didn't require alien technology, why ancient texts could be understood in their cultural context, why anomalies in the archaeological record didn't point to extraterrestrial intervention. Universities held seminars on pseudo-archaeology, using von Däniken's work as a case study in how not to do research. Professional archaeologists grew frustrated with how much time and energy had to be devoted to debunking claims that had no scientific merit to begin with. Carl Sagan, the renowned astronomer and science communicator, addressed ancient astronaut theories in various works, including his book, The Demon-Haunted World. Sagan's approach emphasized that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and he argued that what von Däniken presented didn't meet that standard. Ambiguous photographs, selective quotations, and personal interpretations of ancient art, Sagan suggested, weren't sufficient evidence of alien contact. Instead, they could be better explained as examples of confirmation bias, of seeing patterns that fit preconceived conclusions, rather than what the evidence actually demonstrates. Kenneth Feder, professor of archaeology at Central Connecticut State University and author of Frauds, Myths and Mysteries, Science and Pseudoscience in Archaeology, was approached by producers of ancient astronaut television shows to appear as a skeptical voice. His response was blunt. My response was, I'd be happy to be on your show, but you should know that I think that the ancient astronaut hypothesis is execrable bullshit. He never heard back from them. The shows weren't interested in actual opposing viewpoints. They wanted the appearance of debate without the substance of it. One of the most damaging revelations came from examining von Däniken's own admissions about his methods. In interviews and under questioning, he acknowledged that some of his descriptions were exaggerated or fabricated. His book, The Gold of the Gods, described an elaborate cave system in Ecuador filled with ancient artifacts and even a metal library. When pressed for details in a 1978 interview, he admitted the account wasn't entirely accurate. When confronted about this falsification, von Däniken defended himself by arguing that even if specific details were wrong, his fundamental theory remained sound. But to scientists and scholars, this defense was outrageous. If you're willing to fabricate evidence for one theory, why should anyone believe your other evidence is any more reliable? Trust, once broken, is difficult to restore. Critics also pointed to von Däniken's criminal record. Before becoming famous, he'd been convicted of fraud and embezzlement related to his work in hotel management. he'd served time in prison. While this didn't automatically make his archaeological theories wrong, it did establish a pattern of dishonesty. Von Däniken was someone who was willing to deceive for personal benefit. His supporters saw his prison time as irrelevant to his theories. His critics saw it as part of a broader picture of a man willing to mislead for profit and fame. Archaeologists and anthropologists began to point out a troubling pattern in which ancient achievements were attributed to aliens. The structures and monuments that von Däniken questioned were predominantly from non-white civilizations. The pyramids of Egypt, built by Africans. The sophisticated cities and structures of Mesoamerica, built by indigenous Americans. The monuments of Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Von Däniken attributed all of these to possible extraterrestrial intervention. Meanwhile, European achievements like Roman engineering or Greek architecture were more often presented as products of human ingenuity, though he did occasionally include sites like Stonehenge. The implicit message in this pattern, whether intentional or not, suggests that certain peoples couldn't have achieved these feats on their own. As archaeologist Sarah Parcak has noted, this reasoning echoes problematic assumptions that have historically portrayed non-European peoples as less capable of sophisticated thought or advanced technology. Even if von Däniken didn't consciously intend his theories to carry these implications, critics argue they function that way in practice, diminishing the achievements of ancient peoples of color by attributing them to outside intervention. The theories claim to be about mysteries and alternative thinking, but they're built on a foundation of assuming that certain peoples couldn't have accomplished what they clearly accomplished. This criticism extends beyond just von Däniken. The entire ancient astronaut genre, including television shows like Ancient Aliens, perpetuates these problematic assumptions. By constantly asking, could ancient peoples have done this, while showing monuments built by non-white civilizations, these shows implicitly answer, no, they needed alien help, while rarely asking the same questions about European achievements. Despite all of this criticism, von Däniken's popularity never waned. If anything, the academic pushback seemed to strengthen his support among believers. He positioned himself as a rebel, a truth-teller, persecuted by the establishment. His supporters saw him as someone willing to challenge the orthodox narrative, someone brave enough to ask uncomfortable questions. The fact that scientists and archaeologists rejected his theories was, to them, proof that he was onto something. After all, establishment figures always resist revolutionary ideas, don't they? This framing allowed von Däniken and his followers to dismiss any criticism as narrow-minded skepticism. It created an unfalsifiable position. Evidence against the theory became evidence of conspiracy. Credentials and expertise became signs of indoctrination. Careful research became closed-mindedness. And in this inverted epistemology, knowing less about a subject made your opinion more valid than someone who'd spent decades studying it. The scientific community struggled with how to respond to this dynamic. Debunking von Däniken's specific claims didn't seem to matter. His supporters would just move to different examples, or claim that even if some details were wrong, the overall theory was right. Explaining how ancient engineering actually worked didn't help. People who wanted to believe in alien intervention would simply say that scientists were missing the obvious truth. Demonstrating the racist implications of the theories often backfired, with supporters claiming that anti-racism was just political correctness being used to suppress uncomfortable truths. By the late 1970s, many scientists had given up trying to engage with ancient astronaut theories directly. They'd made their arguments, published their rebuttals, explained the actual evidence. If people chose to believe von Däniken despite all the evidence against him, there was little more that science could do. The divide had become unbridgeable, not because of lack of evidence on either side, but because the two sides were operating with fundamentally different approaches to truth, evidence, and knowledge. Yet the ancient astronaut theory was far from fading away. If anything, it was about to enter a new phase of popularity, driven by new media and new generations of believers. The story of how von Däniken's theories evolved and spread over the subsequent decades reveals much about contemporary culture, about our relationship with experts and authority, and about the enduring human need for wonder and mystery in an increasingly explained world. Erich von Däniken's influence didn't end with his books. In fact, his impact on popular culture arguably reached its peak long after Chariots of the Gods was first published. The ancient astronaut theory, once confined to paperback books and occasional documentaries, exploded into mainstream consciousness through a medium that would have been unimaginable in 1968. Television. Specifically, a show on the History Channel called Ancient Aliens. The show premiered in 2010, starting as a series after an initial documentary special in 2009. The format was straightforward. Each episode would examine a specific ancient mystery, archaeological site, or historical text through the lens of ancient astronaut theory. A rotating cast of experts would appear, asking questions and proposing theories. Chief among these was Giorgio Tsoukalos, an editor and consultant whose wild hair and dramatic presentation style became instantly recognizable. Erich von Däniken himself appeared frequently, lending what proponents saw as the authority of the theory's founding father to the proceedings. Ancient Aliens became a significant success. It has run for over 15 seasons, producing hundreds of episodes by late 2025. It became one of the History Channel's most watched programs. At its peak, millions of viewers tuned in to hear theories about how aliens built Stonehenge, influenced the American Civil War, made contact with the Vikings, created the plague, worked with the Nazis, and pretty much every other historical event or monument you could imagine. The show's reach extended far beyond American borders, being broadcast and translated in multiple countries around the world. The format of each episode followed a predictable pattern, but one that kept audiences engaged. It would begin with dramatic music and sweeping shots of an ancient site or artifact. Then, the narrator would pose a question. Could this structure have been built by ancient peoples with primitive tools? Or might there be another explanation? Cut to interviews with the show's regular contributors, people presented as experts but often lacking relevant credentials in archaeology, history, or related fields. These contributors would offer increasingly speculative theories, each one building on the last, until by the end of the episode, alien intervention seemed not just possible, but probable. Giorgio Tsoukalos became the face of the show, appearing in virtually every episode. With his distinctive spiked hair and dramatic hand gestures, he'd enthusiastically explain how virtually everything in ancient history pointed to extraterrestrial contact. His catchphrase, delivered with absolute seriousness, became a meme. I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens. The internet loved him. Memes featuring his wild-eyed expression and his hair spread across social media platforms. People who'd never watched an episode knew who he was. He became a pop culture phenomenon, the embodiment of ancient astronaut theory in the digital age. Erich von Däniken appeared regularly, usually interviewed in his home in Switzerland or at ancient sites around the world. He'd offer his perspective on various mysteries, always circling back to his core thesis. The gods were astronauts. The impossible achievements of ancient peoples were actually quite possible with alien technology and guidance. The similarities between distant cultures proved that they had a common teacher from the stars. His presence lent historical weight to the show, connecting it directly to the birth of the ancient astronaut theory in the 1960s. Other regular contributors included David Childress, author of numerous books on ancient technologies and lost civilizations. He specialized in proposing that ancient sites showed evidence of advanced machinery and engineering beyond what should have been possible. Whether examining megalithic structures, ancient electrical systems, or supposed aircraft depicted in art, Childress always found ways to suggest that conventional archaeology was missing something obvious. His approach was to overwhelm viewers with technical-sounding language and selective citations of archaeological oddities. William Henry contributed theories about spiritual and mystical connections to ancient astronauts, blending New Age thinking with extraterrestrial contact. He'd discuss ancient texts, religious art, and spiritual practices through a lens that saw aliens not just as physical visitors, but as spiritual guides who helped humanity evolve consciousness. This spiritual dimension gave the ancient astronaut theory an almost religious quality, appealing to people seeking meaning beyond conventional religion or science. The success of Ancient Aliens represented something significant. By 2010, the media landscape had changed dramatically from the 1960s when von Däniken first published his work. The internet had made information more accessible, but also more fragmented. Traditional authorities were being questioned across all fields, from medicine to journalism to science. Conspiracy theories were flourishing in online communities where like-minded believers could reinforce each other's views without encountering contradictory evidence. And television channels were moving away from dry educational content toward entertainment that blurred the lines between fact and speculation, between documentary and reality television. The History Channel itself had undergone what critics called channel drift. Once a network devoted to historical documentaries about wars, biographies, and historical events, it had gradually shifted toward reality shows like Ice Road Truckers and Porn Stars, speculative content about Bigfoot and UFOs, and programming about monsters, aliens, and conspiracies. Educational value took a back seat to entertainment value. Ratings mattered more than accuracy. Ancient Aliens fit perfectly into this new direction. It offered exotic locations, dramatic music, intriguing questions, and just enough pseudo-scientific language to feel educational while entertaining viewers with wild speculation. The show's format was built on a technique that critics called a Gish Gallop, named after creationist Duane Gish, who pioneered it in debates. The strategy involves overwhelming the audience with a rapid-fire series of claims, misinterpretations, and leading questions. Each individual claim might be easy to debunk if you have the time and expertise to research it, but there are so many claims coming so quickly that critical analysis becomes exhausting. By the time you've mentally fact-checked one assertion, the show has moved on to 3 others. The sheer volume creates an impression of vast evidence, mountains of proof, even when each individual piece is flimsy or outright false. A typical episode might mention dozens of ancient sites, artifacts, and texts. For each one, it would present a question that implied mystery. The Great Pyramid's alignment with true north, the precision of Incan stonework, ancient artwork that looks like it might depict spacecraft if you squint and ignore context. The show rarely lingered long enough on any single point for viewers to really think through whether the claim made sense. It just piled claim upon claim, implication upon implication, until the cumulative effect was overwhelming. How could all of this be explained conventionally? There must be something to the ancient astronaut theory, right? Episodes would feature actual archaeological footage, real historical sites, and genuine artifacts. But then the narration would ask leading questions. Could this have been created by ancient peoples with primitive tools? Or did they have help from beyond the stars? The phrasing always suggested that the conventional explanation was questionable, that there was a mystery mainstream archaeology couldn't explain. And then the experts would offer ancient astronaut interpretations as if they were legitimate alternative theories, rather than debunked speculations. Riley Black, a science writer, described the show as some of the most noxious sludge in television's bottomless chum bucket. She criticized the show's technique of overwhelming viewers with fictions and distortions, presenting speculative theories as if they had equal merit to established scientific knowledge. Other critics pointed out that the show almost never included actual archaeologists or historians providing opposing viewpoints. When they did appear, their skepticism was edited down to brief sound bites, easily dismissed by the true believers. Kenneth Feder's experience was typical. He was approached to appear but made it clear he thought the ancient astronaut hypothesis was execrable bullshit. The producers never contacted him again. The show wasn't interested in genuine debate or scientific rigor. It wanted the appearance of documentary investigation while actually promoting a predetermined conclusion. Every episode began with questions and ended by suggesting those questions pointed to alien intervention. The cultural impact was significant. Ancient aliens inspired countless memes. Tsoukalos's declaration, "I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens," became a joke format used across the internet. The show was parodied by South Park in an episode called A History Channel Thanksgiving, which satirized how the channel treated nonsense as though it were fact. The show's influence extended beyond entertainment, though. Surveys showed that belief in ancient astronaut theories was growing, particularly among younger demographics. This presented a problem for archaeologists and educators. How do you counter the influence of a slickly produced television show that runs for hundreds of episodes? How do you compete with entertainment that makes learning about ancient civilizations seem like uncovering hidden truths that they don't want you to know? How do you convince someone who's watched 20 hours of ancient aliens that actual archaeology is more interesting than the alien theories? Some archaeologists tried to fight back through new media. They created YouTube channels, podcasts, and social media accounts dedicated to debunking ancient astronaut claims and explaining what archaeological evidence actually shows. They tried to make real history as engaging and accessible as the pseudo-history that was dominating popular culture. Sarah Parcak, for instance, used satellite imagery to discover lost Egyptian cities and tombs, demonstrating that there were still mysteries to uncover and that real archaeology was doing the uncovering. Others took a different approach, like teaching classes specifically about pseudo-archaeology. University courses would examine ancient astronaut theories not to validate them, but to teach critical thinking, evidence evaluation, and how to distinguish between legitimate research and compelling nonsense. These courses used Ancient Aliens and von Däniken's books as examples of flawed reasoning, showing students how to identify logical fallacies, cherry-picked evidence, and unfalsifiable claims. But the battle was uphill. Entertainment is more engaging than education for most people. Conspiracy theories are more exciting than careful scholarship. The idea that aliens built the pyramids is more dramatic than the reality of Egyptian engineering. And crucially, believing in ancient astronauts doesn't require years of study, learning languages, understanding archaeological methods, or engaging with complex evidence. It just requires watching a television show and being willing to question authority. Von Däniken himself remained active well into his 80s. He continued to write books, give lectures, and appear on Ancient Aliens. At the Ancient Astronaut Conference in Pasadena in 2018, he was welcomed by 24,000 fans with standing ovations, honored as the godfather of ancient alien theory. For someone who'd started as a hotel manager rejected by 20 publishers, it was a remarkable journey. He'd created an entire industry, influenced millions of people, and become one of the most widely read authors in the world. He also remained convinced of his theories until the end. In the foreword to the 50th anniversary edition of Chariots of the Gods, he wrote, "Today, I know definitively that Earth, our home, has been visited by extraterrestrials in the distant past. I also know that those visitors promised our forebears they will return to Earth." That certainty, that absolute confidence despite decades of evidence contradicting his claims, was characteristic of von Däniken's approach. He wasn't presenting hypotheses to be tested. He was presenting what he considered truth to be embraced. When von Däniken died on January 10th, 2026, at the age of 90, obituaries reflected the divided opinion of his legacy. To his supporters, he was a visionary, a pioneer who dared to challenge orthodoxy and ask difficult questions. He'd opened minds and encouraged people to think differently about history. To his critics, he was a charlatan who'd misled millions, spread pseudoscience, and made it harder for people to understand and appreciate actual history. His criminal record, his admitted fabrications, and his dismissal of all criticism were seen as evidence of someone more interested in fame and profit than truth. The truth, as is often the case, is probably more complex than either extreme. Von Däniken genuinely seemed to believe his theories, even if his methods of supporting them were deeply flawed. He'd tapped into something real, a human desire to believe that we're not alone in the universe, that ancient history is more mysterious than textbooks admit, that there are secrets waiting to be discovered. His success wasn't just about clever marketing, though that was part of it. It was about offering a narrative that resonated with millions of people who wanted the world to be stranger and more wondrous. But wanting something doesn't make it true. And the legacy of von Däniken's work is complicated by the damage it's done. It's taught people to distrust expertise, to dismiss archaeological evidence, to embrace unfalsifiable theories, and to see ancient achievements through a lens that diminishes the very real ingenuity and capability of our ancestors. It's made it harder for actual archaeology to reach popular audiences because the truth seems less exciting than the fiction. And it's perpetuated, however unintentionally, racist assumptions about which peoples were capable of sophisticated achievements. The ancient astronaut theory lives on after von Däniken's death. Ancient Aliens continues to air new episodes. Books continuing his work are still published. New generations discover his theories through the internet, through podcasts, through social media. The fundamental appeal hasn't changed. The promise of hidden knowledge, of mysteries that mainstream science won't acknowledge, of connections between ancient wonders and cosmic visitors. These ideas continue to find audiences willing to believe them, despite all evidence to the contrary. As we near the end of our journey through the world of Erich von Däniken and the ancient astronaut theory, we need to ask perhaps the most important question of all: why? Why do these theories persist despite being thoroughly debunked? Why do millions of people continue to believe that aliens built the pyramids when we have extensive evidence of how the Egyptians actually built them? Why does Ancient Aliens continue for season after season when every claim can be fact-checked and found wanting? What is it about these theories that appeals to something deep in human psychology? The answer isn't simple, but it's crucial to understand if we want to make sense of not just ancient astronaut theories, but the broader landscape of pseudoscience, conspiracy thinking, and alternative histories that flourish in contemporary culture. Let's explore the forces that make these theories so compelling. First, there's the appeal of mystery and wonder. In an age where so much has been explained, where science has answers for more questions than ever before, there's something thrilling about the idea that there are still great mysteries waiting to be solved. Ancient astronaut theories promise that the world is more mysterious than it appears, that there are secrets hidden in plain sight, that conventional knowledge is incomplete. This promise is intoxicating. It makes the believer feel like they're part of something bigger, like they're privy to knowledge that most people don't have. Second, there's the distrust of authority and expertise. We live in a time when traditional authorities, whether government, science, or academia, are widely questioned. Some of this skepticism is healthy. Authorities have been wrong before, science has been misused before, experts have made mistakes. But ancient astronaut theories take this healthy skepticism and turn it into a blanket dismissal of all expert knowledge. If scientists say aliens didn't build the pyramids, well, maybe that's just what they want you to believe. Maybe they're hiding the truth. Maybe they're too narrow-minded to see what's obvious. This framing allows believers to feel intellectually superior to experts. They're not uninformed, they're enlightened. Third, there's the confirmation bias that affects all of us. Once you believe in ancient astronauts, everything you encounter gets filtered through that lens. Ancient carvings that might be abstract or symbolic art become depictions of spacemen. Advanced engineering becomes impossible without alien help. Similarities between distant cultures become evidence of a common extraterrestrial influence, rather than independent invention or cultural diffusion through trade and travel. Your brain looks for evidence that confirms what you already believe and dismisses evidence that contradicts it. Von Däniken's theories are particularly effective at triggering this bias because they're so broad. Almost anything in ancient history can be reinterpreted as evidence if you're willing to ignore context and conventional explanations. Fourth, there's the appeal of simple answers to complex questions. How did ancient peoples accomplish such incredible feats? Real archaeology has answers, but they're complicated. They involve understanding ancient social organization, labor systems, engineering techniques, cultural motivations, economic factors, and more. It takes years of study to really understand how the pyramids were built. Ancient astronaut theories offer a much simpler answer: aliens. With one explanation, you can account for every ancient mystery without having to learn about different cultures, different time periods, different techniques. It's intellectually easy, which makes it attractive. Fifth, there's the power of narrative. Von Däniken wasn't just presenting evidence. He was telling a story about humanity's place in the cosmos, about ancient visitors from the stars, about secrets and mysteries and hidden knowledge. Stories are how humans make sense of the world. We're narrative creatures. And a good story, even if it's not true, can be more compelling than a complicated truth. The ancient astronaut story is dramatic. It's cosmic in scope. It's filled with wonder and possibility. The real story of how ancient peoples built their monuments is also dramatic and filled with human ingenuity. But it requires more background knowledge to appreciate. Sixth, there's the social aspect. Believing in ancient astronaut theories gives you a community. There are conferences, websites, forums, social media groups where believers gather. You're not alone in your beliefs. You're part of a movement, a group of truth seekers who see what the mainstream won't acknowledge. This social reinforcement is powerful. It's harder to question beliefs that are shared by your community. that are part of your social identity. Rejecting the theories might mean rejecting the community, and humans are social animals who need belonging. Seventh, there's what psychologists call motivated reasoning. We don't evaluate evidence objectively. We evaluate it in ways that protect our existing beliefs and identity. If accepting that von Däniken was wrong means admitting you were fooled, means feeling stupid or gullible, your brain will work hard to avoid that admission. It's psychologically easier to dismiss criticism, find excuses for flawed evidence, and maintain your beliefs than to admit you were mistaken. This isn't a character flaw. It's how human brains work. We all do it about different things. Eighth, there's the appeal of feeling special. Believing in ancient astronaut theories means you know something that most people don't. You're not one of the sheep following mainstream narratives. You're a truth seeker, awake to possibilities that others refuse to see. This sense of being special, of having secret knowledge, is deeply appealing. It compensates for feelings of powerlessness or insignificance in other areas of life. You might not be able to control much in your life, but you can know the truth about ancient astronauts. Ninth, there's the way these theories exploit cognitive gaps. Most people don't know that much about ancient history, archaeology, or ancient cultures. When von Däniken says ancient peoples couldn't have built the pyramids with primitive tools, most people don't have enough knowledge to evaluate that claim. They don't know what tools the Egyptians actually had, what techniques they used, what evidence exists for construction methods. So the claim sounds reasonable. It exploits the gap between what experts know and what the general public knows. And rather than encouraging people to fill that gap through learning, it encourages them to embrace mystery and speculation. 10th, there's the entertainment value. Let's be honest. Ancient astronaut theories are fun to think about. They make ancient history more exciting. It's more entertaining to imagine alien visitors than to read about administrative records and labor organization. Ancient Aliens is entertaining television, even if it's not accurate. Books about ancient astronauts are page-turners, even if they're not well researched. For many people, entertainment value matters more than accuracy. They're not reading von Däniken as serious scholarship. They're reading it as entertaining speculation, as a thought experiment. The problem is that the books don't clearly signal this. They present themselves as serious investigations, which makes it easy for readers to treat speculation as fact. Understanding these psychological factors doesn't make ancient astronaut theories any more correct. The evidence still overwhelmingly contradicts them, but it does help explain why simply debunking the theories doesn't make them go away. You're not just fighting bad evidence, you're fighting cognitive biases, social bonds, narrative appeal, distrust of authority, and the human need for wonder. That's a formidable opponent. So what's the solution? How do we counter these theories effectively? The answer probably isn't more debunking, at least not by itself. Yes, it's important to correct false information and explain why ancient astronaut theories don't hold up. But it's equally important to make real archaeology accessible, exciting, and wonder-filled. To tell the actual stories of ancient peoples in ways that capture imagination. To make clear that real history is just as amazing as the alternatives, and with the added benefit of being true. It also means teaching critical thinking and media literacy, helping people understand how to evaluate evidence, how to identify logical fallacies, how to distinguish between expertise and speculation, how to recognize their own biases. These are skills that protect against all kinds of misinformation, not just ancient astronaut theories. They're essential in a world where information is abundant, but quality control is minimal. and it means being honest about what we don't know. One reason alternative theories flourish is that they claim to have answers where mainstream archaeology admits uncertainty. But uncertainty isn't a weakness of science, it's a strength. It means we're being honest about the limits of our knowledge. It means we're willing to say, we don't know yet, rather than making up stories to fill the gaps. Teaching people to be comfortable with uncertainty, to see it as an invitation to learn more, rather than an opportunity for speculation, is crucial. The legacy of Erich von Däniken is complicated. He captured the imagination of millions. He made ancient history a topic of mainstream conversation. He asked questions that, in their most basic form, were worth asking. Are we alone in the universe? How did ancient peoples accomplish such incredible feats? What mysteries remain in our past? But the answers he provided were wrong. Dramatically, comprehensively, provably wrong. And in being wrong so publicly and persuasively, he's made it harder for people to understand and appreciate the actual answers, the real stories, the true wonders of our ancient past. As we close this journey through the world of ancient astronaut theory, one thing becomes clear: the human need for wonder, for mystery, for stories that make us feel part of something larger, these aren't going away. The question is whether we'll satisfy those needs with truth or with fiction, with careful research or wild speculation, with respect for ancient peoples or assumptions about their limitations. The ancient astronauts may not be real, but the human impulse that created belief in them certainly is. And understanding that impulse is the first step toward channeling it in more productive directions. In the end, the real mystery isn't whether aliens visited ancient Earth. The evidence is clear that they didn't. The real mystery is the human mind itself, with its capacity for both incredible insight and profound self-deception, its ability to build civilizations and to invent elaborate fictions about how those civilizations were built. We are, each of us, far more interesting and complex than any ancient astronaut theory. And the true story of humanity, told honestly and fully, is more wondrous than any fiction we could invent. When Erich von Däniken passed away in January 2026, the world lost one of its most influential popularizers of alternative history. Whether you see that as a tragedy or as the end of a long career of misleading millions depends on your perspective. What's undeniable is that he changed how popular culture thinks about ancient history. Before von Däniken, ancient astronaut theories were fringe beliefs held by a small number of enthusiasts. After von Däniken, they became mainstream entertainment, discussed at dinner parties, featured in major television shows, incorporated into movies and novels and video games. His influence extended beyond just ancient astronaut theories. He helped create a template for how alternative histories are constructed and promoted. Take an ancient mystery. Suggest that conventional explanations are inadequate. Propose a dramatic alternative that involves hidden knowledge or suppressed truths. Present yourself as a brave truth seeker fighting against the establishment. Package it all in accessible language with dramatic visuals. This formula has been used by countless others for theories about everything from Atlantis to Hollow Earth, from suppressed cancer cures to government conspiracies. Von Däniken also demonstrated the commercial viability of pseudoscience. His 70 million books sold proved that there was a massive market for alternative explanations of historical mysteries. His success inspired an entire industry of similar content. Publishers realized they could make money from books about ancient aliens, lost civilizations, and alternative archaeology, even if the content was scientifically worthless. television producers realized that speculative shows about mysteries and conspiracies drew better ratings than dry, educational content. The financial incentive to create this kind of material became enormous, regardless of its accuracy. But perhaps his most significant impact was on public trust in expertise and institutions. Von Däniken taught millions of people that they shouldn't trust what archaeologists and historians tell them, that conventional scholarship is either wrong or hiding the truth. This message found receptive audiences, particularly in an era of declining institutional trust. Today, we see the consequences in widespread skepticism towards scientific consensus on everything from climate change to vaccines. The ancient astronaut theory may seem harmless, just entertainment, but the epistemology it promotes, the idea that your gut feeling is as valid as expert consensus, that simple explanations are better than complex ones, that authorities are probably lying to you, has real consequences beyond archaeology. Von Däniken probably didn't set out to undermine public trust in science. He likely believed sincerely in his theories, even if his methods were deeply flawed. But the legacy of his work is complicated by the damage it's done to scientific literacy and respect for expertise. It's made it harder for actual archaeologists to reach popular audiences because the truth seems less exciting than the fiction. It's taught people to distrust careful research and embrace speculation. It's perpetuated, however unintentionally, racist assumptions about which peoples were capable of sophisticated achievements. Yet for all the criticism, for all the debunking, for all the evidence against his theories, von Däniken achieved something remarkable. He got millions of people interested in ancient history. Many people who first encountered ancient civilizations through Chariots of the Gods went on to learn the real history, to study archaeology, to appreciate the actual achievements of our ancestors. His books, however flawed, opened doors to curiosity about the past. The question is whether that curiosity led people toward truth or away from it. The persistence of ancient astronaut theories after von Däniken's death tells us something important about human nature. We want the world to be mysterious. We want there to be secrets waiting to be discovered. We want our ancestors to have been part of something grander than the textbooks describe. These desires aren't wrong. The problem is when we let these desires override evidence, when we embrace comforting fictions over uncomfortable realities, when we choose speculation over scholarship. The real wonders of ancient history don't require aliens. The fact that human beings with nothing but human intelligence and human determination built the pyramids, developed sophisticated mathematics and astronomy, created magnificent art, engineered incredible structures, sailed across vast oceans, and established complex civilizations. That's the real miracle. The achievements aren't diminished by being human. They're elevated. They show us what we're capable of. They connect us to our ancestors not as primitive peoples who needed alien help, but as fellow humans who faced challenges and overcame them, who had dreams and realized them, who left monuments that still inspire awe thousands of years later. Von Däniken's theories took this human story and replaced it with one about alien intervention. He took achievements that should make us proud of our species and attributed them to outside help. He took the magnificent diversity of human cultures and reduced it to a single explanation: visitors from the stars. He took the complex, nuanced, fascinating reality of human history and simplified it into science fiction. And in doing so, he may have entertained millions, but he also misled them about the true wonder of what humanity has accomplished. As we move forward in an age of misinformation, deepfakes, AI-generated content, and declining trust in traditional sources of authority, The lessons from von Däniken's career become more relevant than ever. We need to teach people how to evaluate evidence. We need to explain why expertise matters. We need to make real scholarship as engaging as pseudoscience. We need to acknowledge uncertainty while insisting on the difference between speculation and knowledge. We need to satisfy the human hunger for mystery without abandoning truth. The ancient astronauts may not be real, but the human impulse that created belief in them certainly is. Understanding that impulse, that need for wonder and mystery, that desire to believe we're part of something larger, that's crucial. The question is whether we satisfy those needs with truth or with fiction, with careful research or wild speculation, with respect for our ancestors or assumptions about their limitations. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most fascinating and controversial theories in modern history. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you encountered ancient astronaut theories? What made you believe or disbelieve them? And if you enjoyed this deep dive into alternative history, please consider subscribing to the channel. There are more mysteries to explore, more stories to tell, and I'd love to have you along for the journey. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and most importantly, keep seeking truth wherever it may lead. Good night.